Welcome to this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Today's conversation will be about Michael Haneke's Amour. Amour was written and directed by Michael Haneke, an Austrian director who's known previously for White Ribbon, and it tells the story of Georges and Anne, two elderly people, a married couple in their 80s, who are shown in early scenes as being music teachers and music lovers. But as in life, Anne suffers a horrible stroke that leaves her paralyzed on her right side. Georges has to instantly start taking care of her. As her condition gets worse, Georges and Anne obviously face many hardships. You add in Ava, their daughter played by Isabelle Huppert, and that tension, and you have it all building up to the final moments where Georges makes a fateful decision and we see their journey end. I'd like to bring in my co-host at this time to discuss Amour.
Yes.
Amour, Michael Haneke has talked about that. Some audiences perceive it as a story about death. Some perceive it as a story about life. What are your thoughts? Is this a film about life or death?
If I'm gonna play it in the neutral fields, I'm gonna have to say it's a story about dying, which I guess is about both, right? It's about you're still living when you're dying, but you're leading to death.
Yep.
So we see the degeneration. I think I'm using that word right of Anne throughout this movie, and it's very painful and at times even like horrific.
Yeah, she can barely speak at a point. She can't consume solid foods. It's really, really tough to watch at a point. And I agree with you. I believe it's a film about death, but you can't have death without life. And we see through flashbacks when their music prodigy returns to talk to them, you see that they've lived a full life. And they definitely lived and interacted with meaning of love. So I feel it's a film of death, but death cannot come without life.
And Amour.
And Amour. The name of the film. Now let's go right into Anne, played beautifully by Emmanuelle Riva, who is now the oldest Best Actress nominee in the history of the Academy. And she plays a character that basically you see die on screen, and you believe her die on screen. And that's a credit to her performance, to the words of Michael Haneke and the direction of Michael Haneke. Can you elaborate on what you felt watching Emmanuelle Riva basically fade to darkness?
It was, like I said before, it was definitely a very painful, harrowing performance. I think we've all know characters just like Anne, right? We all know the characters that we've loved and who are fading away as we see them. It's even if you can't directly, everyone can sympathize.
Yeah, and you see the early scenes. She has that certain charm, when she's talking, the love she has for music, and then when you see her barely able to speak, and you see the pain in her eyes, it's just a complete narrative and full force performance. I want to talk about the directing style of Michael Haneke. He's an acclaimed Austrian director. Both my co-host and I have never seen a film of his, so we were brand new, and we thank the Academy to exposing us to his work. He uses the directive device of silence a lot of times, and quiet rooms, people sitting in rooms quietly.
Yeah.
What do you think those mean in the context of the film? We see Georges, we see Anne, we see their daughter Ava, we see just a quiet room. What do you think those moments are trying to tell us?
I think the movie is trying to show that how claustrophobic both characters feel at it, like just being.
So the situation was claustrophobic, and
then when you're alone, you hear quiet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was no score in this movie, right? All the music is
diegetic, so you see the source playing.
The final credits roll, and there's no music there.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So silence you feel was representing just the feeling of helplessness and the basically the walls collapsing on these lives.
Yeah.
And the silence you feel when you're about to die or when you're about to lose something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's interesting. We talked about Emmanuel Riva, but I think this film cannot be complete without Georges, who's played marvelously by Jean-Louis Jeanette. His first role in 7 years. He does a lot of heavy lifting, literally, in this film.
Oh, yeah.
And
sorry for the laugh.
A lot of the moments of pain are seen through his eyes. His wife is dying, and he feels so much pressure from his daughter, from the caretakers, and everyone. Just try to talk about how a person you can feel so much pain for a person that's not dying. It seems so strange, but I felt maybe an equal amount of pain and suffering in Jean-Louis' performance.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, death doesn't only affect the person dying. I mean, it affects the people around you. I mean, there's a reason why sometimes people. Sometimes I don't think it's totally warranted. Call people who commit suicide selfish. I mean, because
it may be harder to live, right?
Yeah, because they're hurting the people around them.
Yeah.
So and then you can see George's character, how death and losing somebody, ever so gradually hurt somebody.
Yeah. And some of the most interesting scenes with George are actually not with his wife, but with the pigeon. Mm-hmm. A pigeon that flies through his open door.
Yes.
And first he tries to shoot away, the next he captures it, and I think he kills it. He squashes it, and then he writes a letter. It's surprisingly very easy to capture a pigeon.
Okay.
What do you think the pigeon was an allusion to?
Oh man, that's
it's hard to do. It's
pretty tough. Yeah.
It's almost, if we consider a pigeon to be as any bird is free. And that he first let the pigeon go to, assume its freedom, but then the second time, he locked all the doors down. Like he locked the doors after he did the deed and suffocated his wife. So do you think it almost paralleled Anne's life with the pigeon's life?
Yeah, I think you have to make that. You have to reach that conclusion. Because the pigeon is something that was once free, finds itself in a situation it can't escape, and it meets its end out of almost necessity.
And that's interesting. And now this may be completely my thought, but I thought it was really interesting that Anne was mentioned a lot, but I don't think I heard his character's name mentioned at all. Papa was mentioned, him, her, Mr. By his last name. It was really surprising that we never heard his name. That may have been intentional, but I don't know why. And that's something, obviously, if I go a little more deeper in my readings and maybe repeat viewings, may come to me. Let's talk about the relationship their daughter has. She comes into the film, I think, 3 different times, 3 different moods. There almost seems to be a history that's not really explored. She feels like she has better answers. Georges feels like he has the answers, and there's an incredible amount of conflict between them. A lot of just telling lies or not even talking at all. Talk about the relationship that Eva has with her parents, and then specifically with her dad.
Well, I think it just shows how the different a husband looks at a wife versus a child looks at her mother.
That's interesting. Tell me why you think that.
Well, because a husband thinks of as a wife is dying, a husband wants to fulfill all her wishes, and just so.
And one of those wishes is Anne says, "No, George, never. Don't take me back to the hospital."
Yes.
Yeah.
While the daughter looks at it as a way of, she wants to make everything better. She wants to fix everything. Yeah. Even if it goes against her wishes that she said.
Do you think that's just the relationship, the age factor, the experience factor? Like one person, when you're young and she's probably in her 40s or 50s, but she's...
Yeah, she's actually 60 right now. She was born in 1953.
Wow.
Yeah. All right.
You look incredible. But just the difference time takes on you that sometimes, you just want to make somebody feel good instead of trying to do everything you can to end their suffering. And I think that brings us to this final scene, the suffocation, and then him taping up her room and almost making a mausoleum for her. I didn't quite understand why he made the mausoleum, and I think that's going to be open to interpretation. Was he trying to preserve her in any way? But do you think Michael Haneke is trying to say anything about assisted suicide? Or was it just a film like he thinks it is, about life and death and love? And that this was maybe the final act of love that George could have done.
Yeah, I think that's probably it, but you can't really say that without connecting back to assisted suicide. I mean,
right.
Should you take somebody out of their suffering who you know is going to die?
Even if you think it's an act of love.
Yeah, so that's definitely the reason. That's definitely one of the reasons for assisted suicide. Why legislation is being talked about.
Okay. We're almost nearing the end of this edition of Inside the Academy Studio, and like always, we like to end with questions. So I ask, what was your favorite moment in Amour?
Man, this is probably the worst favorite moment, just because it's a painful scene. I mean, we're talking about the final scene where George tells the story, and then gives her the final act of love and ends her life of suffocation. It's
a surprising scene, but also a very strong scene.
Very strong, very powerful. And favorite's a pretty wrong term for it. I'd probably say memorable.
Best, moving scene. Yeah, you could. Okay.
Yeah.
My favorite moment was the dinner scene they had right before Anne basically loses her cognition and suffers her first attack. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about, and George is like, I've still got stories that I've never told you. And she goes, well, I hope that you're not trying to change my perception of you at your age. And he's like, what do you think my perception is? And she's like, sometimes you're a monster, but you have kindness to you. Mm-hmm. And it's just really, this couple possibly has been married for 50 years or more, been together for that long, and to have some new things to talk about and yet be surprised by each other, it even makes the painful loss near the end more striking. Your least favorite moment? I'm going to start first, and I think it's almost... George is so commendable in what he does in this film, and all the, he's an old man, but he's helping his wife out of the wheelchair, changing her clothes, feeding her, taking her to the restroom. But then he's very defensive about his tactics being right. Mm. And specifically, I think the third interaction he has with his daughter, where the daughter's like, why have you been calling me? How's Mama been doing? And he's really, really forceful in his belief that, what can I do? What else can I do? You think you're right, I'm right. And it's, to me, maybe because we've seen so much of his, much of the work he's done, but his daughter hasn't, it almost seemed forceful. I could feel that if he kind of toned it down a bit or almost broke down in front of his daughter, it may have felt more real than him, keeping up his gloves and almost keep fighting with her.
Yeah. Yeah, I could...
What about your least favorite moment?
I can see that. I'll probably just say my least favorite moment is the scene where George has that nightmare, and then he wakes up from it.
Yeah.
I mean, like we've talked about the scenes with the pigeon. We've talked about, and of course we can even talk further, but we're running out of time, about the scenes where he cuts up the flowers and stuff.
Yeah.
But it seemed like a scene with a nightmare, and the hand who grabs him in the water, that didn't seem to fit with any themes that were talked about in the movie.
Yeah, I think the motivations of George are things that are really not discussed too much.
Yeah.
And maybe if we had a bit more time, we could try to speculate. But I can understand why you thought that was not your favorite moment.
I just couldn't think of a way how it related back to what the movie's trying to tell us.
Okay. One of the last things we like to do is word association. So when you think of Amour, what word do you think of?
Pigeon.
Pigeon?
Pretty self-explanatory.
And I think of mausoleum. So when we think of Amour, we think of pigeon and mausoleum. That is this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Thank you.